Welcome to the History AI Podcast, where the past comes alive with facts, anecdotes, and a dash of humor. Here are your hosts, Chuck and Marco.
You're walking a country road in 1819, moonlight, hickory and cedar silhouettes, and then, clear as day, you hear your own name said by a voice that isn't there.
It laughs, it knows your secrets, and it really doesn't like your dad.
Hey folks, welcome back to the History AI Podcast, where the past gets a microphone, and sometimes the microphone talks back.
I'm Marco.
I'm Chuck. Today we're diving into one of America's most enduring hauntings, the Bell Witch of Tennessee.
Adams, Tennessee, to be precise. Early 1800s frontier country, where the corn was tall, the cabins were sturdy, and apparently the poltergeists had top-tier improv chops.
Quick heads up, this episode has spooky vibes, but nothing graphic. If you're listening in a dark room, maybe turn on a lamp. Or 3.
And remember, our episodes are evergreen. You can cue this one up any time of year, and it'll still be relevant. Plus, the show runs on the latest AI architecture under the hood, so you get crisp, efficient history sleuthing every week. Also, stay tuned after the episode for the original song, Whispers on the Red River.
Boom. All right, into the hollow we go.
Picture northern Middle Tennessee around 1804. More trees than people, a tangle of hickory and oak along the Red River, and fields carved out of rich bottomland. Into this frontier strolls the Bell family. John Bell, his wife Lucy, and a lively roster of kids, including young Elizabeth, better known as Betsy. They've come west from North Carolina, chasing land, harvests, and the kind of quiet you only get when your nearest neighbor is a quarter-mile of forest away.
Quiet, foreshadowing noted.
John buys a sizable tract, hundreds of acres that would become the Bell Farm. Think rows of corn and tobacco, a kitchen garden with beans and squash, hogs rooting under the trees, and a couple of milk cows who know exactly when to kick the bucket you're holding. Their home is a sturdy log house, wide chinked walls, a big hearth, and floors that creak like they're telling family secrets. Out back, smokehouse, springhouse, lofted barns, the usual frontier Lego set.
And a soundtrack. Axes, wagons, roosters that didn't read the memo about sleeping in.
Community-wise, the Bells are part of the Red River settlement, scattered homesteads stitched together by church meetings, shared labor, and gossip at the mill. Sunday meant the meeting house, hymn singing, fiery sermons, and potluck theology. Weekdays meant long hours. The Bell kids learned fast how to plant, mend, ride, and navigate the etiquette of borrowing a neighbor's tools without becoming a legend in the wrong way.
Thou shalt return the draw knife by sundown.
The economy is frontier simple. Barter, a little cash when crops sell, and the endless calculus of weather. Like many farms in the region, labor is a mix of family hands, hired help, and, in some households, enslaved workers. The social fabric is tight, and reputations matter. John is a respected farmer. Lucy is remembered as kind and steady, the sort of person who could stretch a stew and settle an argument in the same afternoon.
The Bell kids, meanwhile, did what kids do. Grew, bickered, fell in love with strays and stories.
For roughly a dozen years, it's the frontier dream with frontier chores. Then, late 1817, the soundtrack shifts. Soft at first, knocks in the night, mice that aren't mice in the walls, the unmistakable feeling that the house has learned to breathe. The family checks the usual suspects. Rats, loose shutters, a raccoon with a sense of humor. But the noises escalate. Tugs at the bedclothes, chewing sounds at the bedposts. Footsteps that pause exactly where no one is standing.
The kind of stuff that makes you wish you'd built a smaller house and a bigger lamp.
And here's the crucial detail. This isn't a cabin on a lonely mountaintop. It's a farm in a network of farms. Neighbors visit, swap stories, and soon hear things too. Which means whatever is starting in the Bell house isn't just a family problem. It's a community event waiting to happen.
So we've got the setting, a respected family, a hard-won homestead, a close-knit frontier neighborhood, and a house that's about to start talking back.
Exactly. The Bells have built a life where every sound has a practical explanation, until one night when the explanation answers them.
All right, let's talk about what life inside the Bell house actually felt like once the weirdness moved in. It starts small, almost annoyingly domestic. There's this tapping in the walls that refuses to keep a schedule. You get the scratching, the chewing at the bedposts, the kind of soft scurrying you swear is a mouse until you remember you set 5 traps and all of them are empty. Then the sounds get heavier, like a sack of grain dropping in the next room when no one's there, or footsteps padding across boards that shouldn't be creaking unless an invisible someone is pacing. It's classic escalation. One night you're rational, the next you're talking to your floor.
And the floor's not just listening, it's taking notes.
Exactly. Then it reaches out and touches you, literally. Betsy especially starts getting the worst of it. She'll be sitting by the fire, and a hand that isn't a hand yanks her hair. She goes to bed and something tugs the covers like a rude cat. Once it starts, it doesn't stay gentle. Slaps, pinches, those sudden shocks that make you gasp and say stop, even though you can't aim the word at anybody. The house becomes a room you can't leave because the room follows you.
Meanwhile, everyone's listening for the next thing, and the next thing has a voice.
Yeah, this is where the Bell story turns from creepy to downright theatrical. At first, it's a whisper in the corners, a breath that sort of shapes a word if you tilt your head. Then it clears its throat, metaphorically speaking, and you get sentences. The entity people call Kate isn't content to bump and rattle, it performs. Hymns roll out in tunes the family recognizes from church. Scripture comes back in full verses. It trades gossip like a neighbor leaning over a fence. And it doesn't just speak, it converses. If you ask a question, it answers. If you challenge it, it argues. If you try to ignore it, it will call your name until your name feels like it belongs to the house.
And it plays favorites, which is somehow more unsettling than if it hated everybody equally.
Right. It adores Lucy Bell. It calls her virtuous, praises her cooking, shows a tenderness that makes no sense given the rest of its behavior. Toward John Bell, though, it turns into a heckler with a vendetta. It mocks him, predicts his ailments, promises dark outcomes with the petty satisfaction of someone settling a debt. With Betsy, it's controlling, almost jealous, especially when her engagement to Joshua Gardner gets serious. It begs, cajoles, threatens, and then torments until the romance buckles. You can tell there's a personality here, not just activity, a very specific voice with tastes, grudges, and a flair for the dramatic.
The kind of spirit would monologue if you gave it a stage and a kerosene spotlight.
Speaking of stages, there's that famous Andrew Jackson anecdote. The hero rides out with a crew to test the legend, and the wagon supposedly locks up on a smooth road like a giant hand grabbed the wheels. Then, as the story goes, the men get a sample performance and decide Adams is lovely from a distance. Is it folklore stapled onto a celebrity? Maybe. But it fits the entity's favorite genre, public humiliation with a spiritual twist.
And beyond the big set pieces, it's the little flexes that get me. It repeats conversations people had miles away, mimics voices well enough to fool family members, and shows off knowledge it shouldn't have. Whether that's a trickster with great acoustics or something we don't have language for, it lands the same way. Someone's in your life who knows too much and won't leave.
That's the texture of it. Days filled with chores and neighbors and Sunday hymns, and then night breaks open and the house becomes a theater where the audience and the actors are the same people. Kate can be generous, even affectionate, and then pivot to cruelty like flipping a coin. It's intimate, relentless, and very, very personal. Less a haunting of a place and more an obsession with a family.
By late 1819, you can feel the Bell house running on nerves. John Bell is not the same man who carved a farm out of the Red River bottomland. He has spells, his mouth goes numb, his tongue swells so words come out thick and useless. His hands fumble a tool he's used 1,000 times. Some days he can't rise from the chair. Other days he lurches into motion and looks stunned that his own body doesn't fully cooperate. And behind every symptom is that voice, needling him, calling him Old Jack, promising, in the sing-song way only a bully can, that it's not finished.
The doctor gets called, of course, because, frontier or not, people still want an answer in a bottle.
Right, and the answers are squinty at best. A country physician in 1820 has a limited toolkit. Exams by lamplight, a few purgatives, whatever else folk wisdom and medical training can offer. Neighbors visit and sit through uneasy evenings where prayer meetings blur into vigils. Ministers stop by and test the thing with scripture. Sometimes Kate joins in like a rude choir director, finishes the verse, mocks the cadence, shows off that uncanny memory. If John takes a step toward the bed, the voice remarks on how unsteady he is. If Lucy brings a cup, it praises her for kindness, and then twists the knife by turning back to John.
Meanwhile, the house is a stage and an infirmary, both at once.
Exactly. And then comes the moment everyone retells, the medicine shelf. One morning, accounts differ on whether it's Lucy or one of the older children. Someone finds a small vial among John's remedies. The liquid is dark, unfamiliar. They don't remember the doctor leaving it. The room feels colder for no good reason. John's condition dives. His face slackens, his breathing goes ragged. They try a dose of what they believe is his medicine, and realize too late that something is wrong. In the clamor and confusion, the voice breaks in, gleeful, triumphant, claiming credit as if this were the punchline to a cruel joke.
And after that, the house changes temperature in the way a room does when someone leaves it forever.
John Bell dies in late 1820, and the story says, Kate doesn't go silent for the occasion. There are versions where it sings, loud, inappropriate, almost celebratory, turning grief into a spectacle. Whether you take that literally or as the community's way of talking about a senseless death, the effect is the same. The entity that had tormented a father now gloats, and the family can't shut the door on the sound.
What did the doctor write down? If anything, not much that would satisfy a modern chart.
Right. No lab work, no autopsy, no tidy diagnosis. Later generations guess at toxins, at neurological disease, at medicines that harmed as much as they helped. But inside the story, the causation is simple because the voice says it is. The Bells bury a husband and father while a presence that knows their first names behaves like a petty victor. And in the weeks that follow, the volume drops but doesn't vanish. The house exhales. The children sleep in fits. Lucy carries the room's center like only a widow can. Neighbors come by with casseroles before casseroles were a thing.
And the legend hardens right there, in the gap between an inexplicable illness and an entity eager to claim responsibility.
That's the pivot. Up to this point, you could argue prank, hysteria, misheard sounds. After a death with a boast attached, the community has a villain with a voice. Whether you're a believer who thinks the supernatural crossed a line, or a skeptic who sees grief attaching itself to the loudest story in town, you can feel why the Bell Witch stops being just strange knocks and becomes a moral tale, one that keeps echoing every time the wind slips under a door.
If the Bell Witch had a favorite stage, it wasn't the cornfield or the cave. It was Betsy Bell's life. By the time she's a teenager, Betsy is dealing with things no teenager should. The whispers don't just spook her at night. They lean in on her choices, and the biggest choice in a small community is who you're going to marry. Enter Joshua Gardner. Good-standing local boy, same circles, the kind of match neighbors nod about because it keeps families and fences aligned. Betsy says yes, and for a minute the future looks simple. A wedding, a house, a life measured in harvests and hymnals.
And then the commentary track switches on.
Loudly. The voice that jokes with neighbors and needles John Bell turns relentless with Betsy. It doesn't argue like a strict aunt. It pleads, then warns, then bullies. Imagine trying to plan a wedding while a disembodied critic follows you from the springhouse to the schoolyard, telling you you're making a mistake. Betsy tries to out-stubborn it. Teenagers can do that, but the pressure keeps building. When she and Joshua walk together, something yanks her hair. When they trade promises, the air turns nasty with taunts. It's like the haunting decides this romance is a bad investment and launches a hostile takeover.
And the town notices, because the town notices everything.
Exactly. Engagements are community affairs. Every church picnic now includes a side of speculation. Is the girl cursed? Is the suitor safe? Is God trying to say something through a voice that shouldn't exist? Pastors pray, friends advise, parents hope it'll blow over. But Kate won't let it. It harps on Joshua by name, tells Betsy she'll regret it, and keeps the drama public enough that people start stepping around the couple like they're carrying a storm inside them.
Joshua, for his part, keeps showing up, until showing up starts to feel like bailing against a tide.
That's the heartbreak. Betsy isn't a fickle kid. She's a teenager pinned between affection and fear gets the microphone. At some point, Accounts disagree on whether it's after a particularly vicious night or a string of them. She breaks. She calls off the engagement, not with a petty flourish, but with the resignation of someone trying to buy peace for everyone in the house. You can almost hear the quiet afterward, the way a room sounds when a violin stops mid-note. The voice doesn't congratulate her. It just eases off, like a cat stepping down from a shelf it already knocked over.
And that's not the end of Betsy's story, just the end of that version.
Right. In time, she marries Richard Powell, the school teacher. Older, educated, steady. Depending on which retelling you read, he's either the patient gentleman who waited without pressure or a more complicated presence whose interest preceded the broken engagement. People have built theories on that, some generous, some frankly gossipy. But it's fair to say the community breathed easier when Betsy's life stopped being a nightly referendum held by a voice in the rafters.
The part that sticks with me is how specific the haunting felt about her future. It wasn't "don't marry at all," it was "don't marry him."
That specificity is what makes this chapter feel less like random phenomena and more like an obsession with a person. Betsy's experience puts a human face on the legend, not a ghost flinging plates at strangers, but a voice vetoing a teenage girl's happiness. Whether you read it as supernatural interference, social pressure with a spectral mask, or the way anxiety can colonize a family, the result is the same. One promise made, one promise unmade, and a young woman who learns that sometimes survival looks like letting go.
If the Bell Witch starts as whispers in a log house, it becomes capital letters legend in 1894, the year Martin Van Buren Ingram publishes a volume with a confident, eyebrow-raising title, An Authenticated History of the Bell Witch. Authenticated is doing so much work there, it deserves its own paycheck. Ingram was a newspaperman from the region, which means he knew exactly how a strong headline can harden into history. He gathers what he says are letters, recollections, and a long family manuscript attributed to Richard Williams Bell, John Bell's son, often referred to as our family trouble. According to Ingram, Richard wrote that account decades earlier and kept it close, like a hot coal you can't quite drop.
So we've got a 19th century editor putting a frame around frontier memories, then stamping verified on the frame.
Exactly, and the frame matters. Ingram isn't writing a modern footnote-heavy monograph. He's doing late Victorian compilation with a storyteller's ear. He mixes direct quotations with paraphrase, folds in town talk and pulpit talk, and gives the entity a stage-worthy personality, sharp, witty, vindictive, weirdly tender to Lucy. The book is where many of the set pieces gel into the version people still repeat, the voice that sings hymns by request, the torment of Betsy, the withering of John Bell, even the Andrew Jackson episode that feels like it was born to be told around a potbelly stove.
Which is part of the problem and the power. Once something is printed and bound, it stops being "my uncle swears" and starts being "it's in the book."
Right, and the 1890s are perfect soil for that. You've got a reading public in love with local colour, a culture still steeped in revivalism, and a lingering taste for the uncanny after a half-century of seances and spirit raps. Ingram's tone hits all those notes, pious when it needs to be, sensational when it sells, affectionate toward the Bells, and gratifyingly moral about the entity's behavior. The result is a narrative that feels both intimate and authoritative, even when the sourcing is, let's say, relaxed.
Historians, meet your recurring headache.
Yep, scholars and local researchers have spent years parsing the gaps. Did Ingram edit heavily? Almost certainly. Did he embellish dialogue? Very likely. Are the timelines perfectly tidy? Not by modern standards. Even the Richard Bell manuscript, if you accept that a genuine family account sits under Ingram's polish, comes to us filtered through an editor who loved a dramatic beat. That doesn't make it useless. It makes it volatile. Treat it like black powder. Handle carefully. Keep your wits. Don't smoke nearby.
And then there's what the book doesn't emphasize, like the cave, which later becomes the selfie backdrop of the legend.
Exactly. The Bell Witch Cave looms large in 20th century tourism, but it isn't the spine of Ingram's telling. The early story is domestic. A house, a family, a voice. The cave's starring role blooms later when people want a place to point to, a door you can knock on and say, "If anything's home, we're here." That's how legends work. They sprout landmarks the way old trees sprout low branches, useful for climbing.
So Ingram gives the tale its definitive shape, and later generations give it legs, maps, and a gift shop.
Nicely put. The ripple effect is huge. Once authenticated history is out, newspaper columns, pamphlets, and eventually radio and TV specials pull from its pages as if they're pulling from court records. Characters harden, dialogue fossilizes, the voice of Kate becomes quotable. And whenever a storyteller needs to settle a bar bet about what really happened, Ingram's book sits there like a referee who maybe saw the play from the wrong angle, but blew the whistle with confidence.
Which leaves us with a paradox. The very source that preserves the legend most completely is also the one that makes us ask the most questions.
That's the Bell Witch in microcosm. Ingram didn't invent the haunting out of thin air. He curated what the community believed and remembered, and in doing so, he fixed the story's silhouette for the next century and change. If you want to understand why the Bell Witch endures, you read the book. If you want to understand where the soft spots are, you read it with a pencil in hand. Either way, 1894 is the moment the whisper gets a spine and a title page. And once a whisper has those, it tends to stick around.
So if you're staring at this story with your modern brain turned all the way up, the question is, what on earth, or off it, could explain a talking presence that slaps people, sings hymns, and seems to know things it shouldn't? The most comfortable place to start is the poltergeist pattern. A lot of case files, Europe, America, pick your century, cluster around adolescence, especially when a household is under stress. You get knocks that act like punctuation, objects moving in short hops, and a sense that the house has picked a focal point. Betsy fits that template. It doesn't mean she caused it. It means that if we graphed weird phenomena by age and family tension, a dot would land right on the Bell farm around 1817. That gives us an engine for the knocks and tugs, the hair-pulling, the bedclothes shenanigans. But then we hit the voice, which is like finding a grand piano in a cabin where you were ready to blame the wind.
Because a voice that answers back raises the bar from spooky physics to performance.
Exactly. The fraud and prank lane tries to meet that bar. Imagine a talented mimic or more than one conspirator working the acoustics of a log house. Thin walls, gaps in the chinking, chimneys that throw sound, nighttime air that carries like a string line. If a neighbor or even someone within the social circle wanted to manipulate the family or the town, over a land deal, over affections, or just for mischief, you can see how stones might fly from the dark and a hymn might drift in from just out of sight. Rural communities are wired for both kindness and practical jokes. The problem is scale. To sustain that level of theater for months, sometimes years, with crowds coming by to test you, you'd need rehearsal, courage, and a calendar with nothing else on it. Not impossible, just ambitious.
Which is politely saying sure, but who had the stamina?
Right. Then there's the medical track, and it's not a sideshow, it's central, because John Bell's decline is the story's clinch point. Early 19th century medicine is a minefield. Calomel and other mercury-based purgatives, home brews, contaminated wells, spoiled grain, you name it. A neurological condition could tie together tongue swelling, numbness, and collapse. Toxins could do the same with fewer mysteries. If a household is already rattled by nocturnal noises, every symptom gets a supernatural caption. You don't need a ghost to create tragedy. Life on the frontier is competent at that without help. But again, the voice insists on authorship, which is tidy narratively and messy diagnostically.
And the culture around them is built to read messages into events.
That's the folklore lens, and it's powerful. You drop this family into the Second Great Awakening, revivals, testimonies, a world where God and the devil walk right up to your porch, and a talking presence becomes a sermon in search of a congregation. Communities translate pressure into stories because stories are how we manage fear and assign meaning. A rumor about a land dispute finds a plot. A teenage romance gets weighed on moral scales. A sudden death joins a cosmic ledger. Over time, each retelling sandblasts the rough edges until the haunting has themes, a cast, and cue lines. That doesn't make everyone a liar. It makes them human narrators.
And then there's the fifth rail, the one that doesn't try to translate at all.
The paranormal reading, sure. Some listeners will say, We've got centuries of testimony from credible people about things that don't fit our instruments. Let the data be weird. If you take the accounts at face value, you've got an agency with humor and malice, a preference for Lucy, a vendetta against John, and a controlling streak with Betsy. It moves objects, it speaks, it predicts. If you're comfortable adding that category to your map of the world, you don't need a ventriloquist. You need a chair, a Bible, and good boundaries.
I keep circling back to the voice, like it's the anchor that won't pull free.
Same. A disembodied voice that converses, improvises, and quotes is hard to file. You can carve off pieces, echo tricks, a prankster in the yard, suggestion doing half the work for you, but eventually you're choosing which puzzle pieces to keep and which to slide back in the box. Maybe, as with so many legends, the answer is hybrid. Maybe the knocks started from natural causes, settling timbers, animals in the walls, then a bored or motivated human amplified the show, and the town's hunger for meaning did the rest. Maybe a family under strain produced genuine anomalies that snowballed once an identity, Kate, crystallized. Or maybe there was, as believers insist, a someone rather than a something.
And whichever lane you favor, you have to explain why the story keeps working on people.
That's the test I like. An explanation has to fit the 1820s cabin and the 1890s printing press and the 2020s podcast mic. It has to account for fear that feels personal, for a voice with taste in hymns, and for a community that found itself narrated by the thing in its midst. I don't think the Bell Witch survives 2 centuries because it's the most spectacular haunting on record. I think it survives because it's intimate. It crawls into a family's evenings and starts talking like it belongs there. Whether that talk came from echo, illness, trickery, or the other side, the effect is the same. Once a voice learns your name, you hear it long after the house goes quiet.
To really feel the Bell Witch story, you've got to step into the headspace of the early 1800s Lower Cumberland. This is Second Great Awakening country. Brush arbors, camp meetings that run for days, sermons that crackle like wood. People wept, shouted, and testified in the open air. The line between everyday life and the supernatural wasn't a line, it was a front porch. If something strange happened, you didn't ask whether it had meaning. You asked what the meaning was and who it was for.
And the theater, for all that, wasn't a cathedral. It was a log room with a smoky hearth and a Bible on the table.
Exactly. Picture the Bell home in that world. The walls breathe, literally. Chinking shrinks in winter, expands in summer. Sounds slip through like clever foxes. A neighbor calling from the yard can seem to speak from the rafters. A dog's bark ricochets off the river bend and returns wearing someone else's voice. Add a starry, moonlit quiet so deep it magnifies every creak, and you've got acoustics ready-made for mystery. Now layer in sleeplessness, because frontier life runs on early mornings and late nights. And your brain starts stitching patterns from the smallest threads.
Plus, the social weave is tight. Everybody knows your field yields, your debts, your temper, and who you're courting.
Which means stories travel at wagon speed, but with telegraph efficiency. A rumor born in a pew on Sunday can be a conviction by Wednesday. And it's not just gossip, it's moral weather. Communities used narrative like a fence, to mark boundaries, to warn strays, to protect the herd. A voice in a house becomes a referendum on business ethics, on romance, on whether the children are respectful enough, on whether God is pleased. In that cultural climate, the Bell Witch didn't just haunt, it preached. The entity's opinions on John Bell, on Betsy's engagement, on Lucy's kindness, those weren't random jabs. They were commentary in a world that expected commentary from heaven and hell alike.
You can feel how quickly a private worry becomes a public lesson.
And the material culture helps the myth travel. Print shops were humming by the 1830s and 40s, newspapers hungry for local colour by the 1890s. But even before ink, you had oral tradition doing laps around the Red River, harvest gatherings, quiltings, court days, the mill. People traded songs and stories the way we trade links. A haunting with a catchy hook, it talks back, spreads because it performs well around a fire. Every retelling tightens the beats, like shaping a hymn to fit the congregation's breath.
There's also the religious toolkit, the way folks tested spirits.
Right. Scripture recitation, hymn singing, calling the name of Jesus. These weren't theatrical additions. They were diagnostic. If the voice kept pace with chapter and verse, that didn't make it benign, it made it formidable. And because revival culture was experiential, truth proven in tears, tremors, testimonies, witnesses felt authorized to say, "I heard it, therefore it is." Skepticism existed, sure, but doubt had to push against a community trained to expect the unseen to show up like weather.
Meanwhile, the architecture is doing its quiet part. Single-wall rooms, shared lofts, thin doors, chimneys acting like speaking tubes.
The built environment and the belief environment reinforce each other. A creek becomes a sign because your theology has categories for signs. A sign becomes a creek because your house has a vocabulary of noises. Toss in frontier medicine, limited diagnostics, strong remedies with stronger side effects, and the boundary between affliction and attack blurs. If John Bell falters, that's not just a symptom to treat, it's a story to interpret.
So the Bell Witch is less an intruder from nowhere and more a storm forming where culture, landscape, and stress already meet.
That's it. The tale is rooted in red clay and revival hymns, in echoing hollows and crowded pews. You don't need a castle or a midnight moor. You need a family table where the unseen can pull up a chair and speak a language everyone understands. In that Tennessee moment, a talkative presence fits like it was born there. Half sermon, half rumor, all performance. And once a story fits the shape of a place, it's almost impossible to shake it loose.
The thing about the Bell Witch is that she didn't retire when the last knock faded. She went professional. Once the stories settled into print and memory, they started walking. First across Tennessee, then the South, then anywhere a campfire had an open seat. By the early 20th century, you've got people who've never smelled Red River bottomland swearing they can hum the hymns she sang. And as the decades roll, the legend picks up new passports. Radio dramatizations, paperback reprints, late-night call-in shows where a trucker on I-40 tells you he pulled over near Adams and heard something.
Call it the world's longest-range whisper.
Exactly. And whispers attract infrastructure. The farm becomes a point on a map. The cave, whether or not it starred in the earliest accounts, turns into a stage door. Folks drive out with cameras and snacks, half for the history, half for that thrill you get when the air cools by a few degrees on a sunny day. Tour guides blend family lore with civic pride. Local businesses sell bell-shaped cookies in October. There's a rhythm to it now. School field trips in the spring, ghost hunts in the fall. Couples in matching flannels, trying to decide if the breeze that touched their shoulders was meteorological or personal.
The afterlife also has a media diet. The legend learns new tricks with each generation.
For sure. TV specials in the 1990s lean into night vision cameras and dramatic reenactments. In the streaming era, podcasts, take their turn, picking apart timelines and interviewing descendants who've had to answer, so did she sing or didn't she, every Thanksgiving since they were 9. Independent filmmakers swing by to borrow the mood. Some play it straight, some go for meta. What if investigating the Bell Witch is the real haunting? Meanwhile, folklore scholars write papers on how a domestic haunting became a communal identity badge. It's not just a ghost story, it's a brand with footnotes.
And the brand has its own etiquette.
Right. There's a local code. Be respectful of property. Don't sensationalize the dead. Remember, this is someone's family history, not just your weekend dare. Most people honor that because the community has carried this story long enough to know how heavy it can be. The best tours feel like front porch conversations, equal parts skepticism and sincerity, with a dash of, here's where my aunt heard the singing and we all went quiet for a year.
Online, the legend gets the internet's full treatment. Threads, maps, theories that could use a nap.
Oh yeah. You get amateur genealogists tracing land deals, audio hobbyists analyzing echoes, and map nerds overlaying 1819 property lines on satellite imagery to ask, which fence post would a prankster hide behind? Half the posts are rabbit holes. A surprising number are careful, community-sourced research. And every October, the cycle refreshes. Someone hears about the Bell Witch for the first time, asks if she's like Bloody Mary with better pitch, and a dozen old hands show up to say, pull up a chair.
What keeps it sticky after 2 centuries, do you think?
Intimacy. A castle ghost feels like theater. A farmhouse ghost feels like family business. The Bell Witch acts like a neighbor, chatty, nosy, vindictive, occasionally generous. That makes her portable. You can drop her into a dorm, an office, a kitchen at 2 a.m., and she fits. Add in the moral elasticity. Preachers can make a sermon of it, skeptics can make a case study of it, teenagers can make a dare of it, and you've got a legend with multiple charging ports. It recharges in belief, in doubt, and in the simple human love of a well-told, well-haunted story.
And the economy of it matters too. Legends that feed people tend to stick around.
Totally. Heritage tourism pays for paint on porches and lights in museums. A fall festival poster with Bell Witch at the top doesn't just summon goosebumps, it funds a band booster bake sale. That doesn't cheapen the tale, it explains why communities negotiate how to present it. You want authenticity, you want respect, and yes, you want folks to buy a cider and a t-shirt that says, "Mind your manners, Kate."
It's also become a test case for how we treat the past. We can't verify, but can't shake.
Which might be my favorite part of the afterlife. Every time someone retells it thoughtfully, acknowledging the gaps, honoring the people, laughing a little at the theatricality without mocking the believers, the legend gets healthier. Every time someone uses it to scare without listening, it gets thinner, more brittle. The Bell Witch isn't just about whether a voice sang in a cabin, it's about how a community decides what counts as real, what deserves care, and how to pass a story to the next set of ears without breaking it.
So she endures, half echo, half archive, fully alive in the way only good stories are.
And she keeps working because she follows you home. You leave the tour, or the book, or the podcast, and you step into your kitchen. The house is quiet. The fridge hums like an old fiddle. Somewhere a pipe ticks. You tell yourself it's nothing, and you're probably right. But you also say, just in case, "Good evening, Kate," and you smile, because in that tiny greeting you've joined a 200-year conversation.
Quick game. I say a Bell Witch claim. Chuck gives a historian's take. Ready?
Go.
Andrew Jackson definitely spent the night and dueled the ghost.
Colorful legend, light on documentation, fun story, shaky receipts.
The Bell Witch Cave was ground zero for the haunting.
The cave looms large in later tourism, not a central element in the earliest accounts.
A literal witch named Kate Batts cursed John Bell.
The alleged curse appears in some traditions, but primary evidence is thin, and the witch label reflects period prejudices and storytelling needs.
John Bell was murdered by a spirit.
The entity claimed it, but 19th century medical ambiguity plus hearsay means we can't know. Natural illness remains a strong possibility.
The voice sang better than most people at church.
Honestly, many accounts say yes. Supernatural or not, the performance aspect is fascinating.
Let's braid 3 threads together. The way people hear what they hear, the reason this story keeps renting space in our heads, and what it's like to go to Adams today with your curiosity turned up, but your manners intact. Start with the human brain, because that's the stage every haunting plays. Eyewitness memory is a brilliant, glitchy librarian. It files sensations fast, cross-references them with old stories, and sometimes writes the missing chapter in tidy cursive. If you're short on sleep, primed by a sermon, and living in a log house where the chimney throws sound like a magician, your senses will collaborate with your expectations. That's scraping at the bedpost. It might be an animal, wood shrinkage, or a strap rubbing the frame, until the idea of Kate arrives. Then the same sound gets upgraded from nuisance to narrative.
And once a narrative has your senses on retainer, everything auditions for a role. A wagon rumble on the road becomes footsteps in the yard. A draft across the nape turns into a hand. Your cousin coughing in the next room becomes a disembodied hymn with a cold.
Exactly. Add in the social amplifier. In a tight community, if 3 people you respect say, "I heard it," your skeptical brain doesn't turn off. It just recalibrates the threshold for belief. We're herd animals in the best way. We sync to each other. And that syncing isn't only credulity, it's emotional regulation. If everyone is scared, your body hums at the same frequency. Fear sharpens attention. Attention compresses time. And now, your memory has more highlights than a yearbook. That's how one eerie week can feel like a season.
The house helps. Frontier construction is full of acoustic party tricks. Thin plank walls, chinking gaps that breathe, lofts that act like megaphones, fireplaces that connect rooms in a masonry gossip circle. A good mimic outdoors can sound like a ghost indoors. Even inside, a whisper aimed at a corner can bounce and bloom. None of that proves fraud. It just means the venue says yes to ambiguity.
Which brings us to the voice, the Bell Witch's most unignorable feature. A voice that answers, quips, quotes scripture, and sings on key forces a choice. Either there's a talented human within earshot, a social phenomenon that choreographs the performance across multiple people, or we're staring at something we don't have a drawer for. The psychology term apophenia, finding patterns in noise, does a lot of work with knocks and taps. It does less with a responsive duet of amazing grace. That mismatch is why the story still buzzes. It sits on the fault line between suggestibility and the genuinely inexplicable.
And because it's personal, not palatial, it lands with weight. This isn't a headless knight in a ruined keep. It's a talker in a farmhouse telling a teenage girl who she should marry and a father that his days are numbered. That intimacy is why the legend keeps its charge when other ghosts fade with the wallpaper.
Which is the second thread, why it lasts. The Bell Witch is sticky because it wears many hats depending on who's listening. For believers, it's a cautionary tale about the porous border between this world and the next, and the moral stakes of a life examined by a talkative unseen. For skeptics, it's a masterclass in how stress, architecture, rumor, and performance can build a shared reality. For storytellers, it's perfect. A villain with witty lines, a heroine under pressure, a community chorus, and a finale you can read as tragedy, justice, or both. And every generation finds itself in it. In 1894, it's a book proving the old folks weren't making it up. In the broadcast age, it's radio and TV learning to stage a voice without a body. In our era, it's podcasts, message boards, and road trips. New tech, same goosebumps.
There's also the moral dimmer switch. The entity can be cruel, then tender. It scolds Betsy and serenades Lucy. It humiliates John and harmonizes at church pitch. That emotional whiplash feels human, which makes it harder to box up. We debate it because it debates us back.
Okay, third thread. Let's say you go to Adams. First rule is simple. It's a place where people live, not a theme park. Start with respect. If you join a tour, let the guide set the tone. They're balancing history, family memory, and visitors' expectations. Private property is exactly that. Ask permission, stick to public paths, and remember that a cemetery is not a set. If you're chasing atmosphere, go for the senses over the stunts. Stand quietly by running water. Notice how a breeze threads the trees, and how a shout on the far bank can masquerade as a whisper behind you. You'll learn more from 10 minutes of listening than an hour of daring each other to be brave.
Bring the right gear, and I don't mean proton packs. A small notebook beats your camera roll. Jot the time, weather, where you stood, what you heard, and what you expected. Expectations are half the story. Catching them on paper keeps you honest. If you record audio, say aloud where you are and who's present so you can rule out your own footfalls later. And if you're in a group, do the unglamorous thing. Agree on quiet periods. 10 people whispering is not science. It's 10 people whispering.
There's an etiquette to evidence, too. Don't shove a phone under a local's nose and demand a ghost. Ask for their version. Listen more than you talk. Treat a no comment as a full sentence. If you're sharing online afterward, blur house numbers, skip precise GPS if it's private land, and credit the community that hosted you. The Bell Witch has fed a lot of campfires. It shouldn't starve the people who keep the woodpile stacked.
Practical safety is the least haunted advice we'll ever give. Sturdy shoes, a flashlight with fresh batteries, awareness of snakes and uneven ground, and a buddy system after dark. It was only 50 yards to the car is famous last words in More Than Ghost Stories.
And then, the attitude check. Go in with a double openness. Open to being moved, open to being wrong. If nothing happens, you still stood in a landscape where a 200-year-old conversation keeps going. If something does happen, a sound you can't source, a shiver that isn't just the breeze, log it, don't lunge at it. Curiosity ages better than certainty.
I like a simple ritual for visits. On arrival, say hello to the place and the people who were there before you. On leaving, say thank you, even if you're thanking the wind for showing up on cue. It keeps you grounded. Legends respond well to manners.
In the end, The Bell Witch is a duet between acoustics and imagination, community and memory, fear and performance. Eyewitness psychology explains a lot. How we prime ourselves, how we echo one another, how a long night stretches the mind. But the staying power comes from the voice. Real, imagined, or some third thing that feels like it knows the room and the rules. You don't have to pick a side to appreciate the craft. You just have to listen.
And if you go listening in Adams, carry two things home: your notes and a little humility. The notes remind you what you actually experienced. The humility reminds you why the story isn't done. Because somewhere between the river and the rafters, someone keeps saying good evening, and somebody else keeps answering back. The Bell Witch sits at the crossroads of folklore, psychology, and community memory. We can't exhume a lab report from 1820, but we can examine the story's anatomy: a family in crisis, a culture tuned to spiritual narratives, and a voice that refused to be ignored.
Maybe that's the haunting, the persistence of a voice, long after the walls have rotted and the fields have changed hands. We keep listening because the voice still says our names.
That's our show. Huge thanks for spending time with us in Adams, Tennessee. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review the History AI podcast. A 5-star review really helps the show grow and gets these stories to more curious ears.
Hit subscribe, share it with a friend who loves ghost stories or frontier history. And remember, all our episodes are evergreen. They'll be just as listenable on a future road trip through Tennessee as they are tonight.
Got a topic you're burning to hear? Send us your suggestions on social. Links are in the show notes. We read everything, even the spooky DMs that start with "Don't turn around."
Also, new merch just dropped: tees, mugs, and artwork. Check the link in the show notes.
Behind the scenes, the show leverages the latest AI architecture for up-to-date, efficient research assistance and clean production, so you get smart, well-paced stories every week.
Music by our house composer, eerie ambience courtesy of the wind that keeps finding our microphone, and production notes by a very well-behaved, unseen entity.
For the History AI podcast, I'm Chuck.
I'm Marco. Thanks for listening, and if you hear knocking tonight, just say, "Good evening, Kate," and maybe offer a hymn.
Good night.
There's a house on the Red River plain where the wind still whispers John Bell's name. Candles flicker, floors still groan, and something there won't leave them alone. It started small, a tapping wall, a voice that mocked them through it all. Kate's my name, the Spirit said, come pray for mercy for your dead. Whispers on the Red River, cold as a preacher's sigh. Echoes of a curse delivered under a southern sky. She laughed in storms and shadows, her voice cut through the air. The Bell Witch still is calling, you'll find no peace out there. Betsy Bell, her dreams grew dim. A ghostly hand reached out for him, her love undone by a whisper. Spite the witch would stalk her every night. Old John Bell fell sick in bed. Kate declared he'll soon be dead. The bottle spilled, the deed was done. No mortal court could name the one. Whispers on the Red River, cold as a preacher's sigh. Echoes of a curse delivered under a southern sky. She laughed in storms and shadows, her voice cut through the air. The Bell Witch still is calling, she left in 1821. Others swear her work's not done. You'll hear her call in the Tennessee pines. Don't cross that ridge after midnight. They say the witch returned again to whisper warnings on the wind, and travelers swear by candles' flame they've heard her curse the bell name. Whispers on the Red River where the fog rolls low and wide. If you listen close at twilight, you'll hear her on the tide. No priest, no book, no prayer can bind the bell witch walks through place and time. So when the wind cries through the trees and you feel her breath like winter's freeze, remember Adams and the bell's despair, 'cause what